doesn't have an example of production in this chapter. It will in a later chapter. But the example of the fulfillment, a customer places an order, either on the phone or mail order. So you prepare the shipment. You send notice to the warehouse what to pack, how many, and so on. The shipment is sent, and then after that, usually an invoice is sent to the customer, and at some point the customer makes payment. And so, of course, the accounting department is involved all along the way. It used to be that big companies were, well, they still are, divided up in functional areas. Because in a small business where you have 5 employees, the boss can kind of keep his eye on what's going on. If you have 25 employees, the boss can still kind of keep his eye on, or her eye on, what's going on. If you have 1,000 employees, it gets pretty hard. So companies decided to organize, you have an accounting department and you have a manager of that department. You have a warehouse, someone is in charge of the warehouse. So things are kind of separated. And it really worked as companies grew from small, 10 employees to 10,000 employees. That was about the only way you could really kind of control what was going on in your company. One person couldn't keep her eye on everything. What happens sometimes within this functional view is that you lose sight of people who work in receiving don't really know what's going on in purchasing. You really don't know what's going on outside of your functional area. And it still worked. There were a lot of slowdowns, a lot of delays because of this. Because if one person forgot to send his little piece of paper onto the next, as the process was evolving, if he forgot to send his little piece of paper onto the next one, the whole process would stop. In any of them, procurement or any of the main processes, kind of it's an understanding of who has to do what and when it has to be done. Who does what where, in what department. And you still have functional areas, but the process goes across the different areas. So who's responsible for the process? And the reason for this functional structure, as I said, is just when companies got so big, it was just a way of keeping track of the organization. So this is how the book puts it, the various functional areas: purchasing, operations, warehouse, sales, research and development, finance and accounting, human resources, of course, is a whole different area, the people who hire and take care of benefits and so on, and of course the computer geeks over in the IT department. As you can see, certain processes, like the procurement process, goes across, certain things are happening in each of the functional areas, and likewise in the fulfillment process, that lots of areas were involved in it. The problem is, a problem is what they call the silo effect. You know what a silo is on a farm? You just have everything is contained in a kind of a narrow, what's a silo? Kind of a narrow structure. So the communication between the different areas sometimes would break down. Certain things have to be communicated, certain information has to be exchanged, and it was kind of a challenge to coordinate this because maybe the manager of the warehouse somehow doesn't really like the manager of the purchasing department, and things like that. Before enterprise systems, a lot of this was paper-based. I create a purchase. I'm in the warehouse. I create a purchase requisition. It's probably a 2-part form. I fill it out, how many I need, and what sizes and so on, and I would indicate who made this order. And then I would keep one part and send the next part to the purchasing department. The purchasing department would take mine, refill out some of the same things, like a list of parts. So you have to re-enter either by pencil or even on computer. You have to refill out the same thing that somebody else already filled out. So that's a huge delay. And of course, the other type of delay is that if someone forgets to send a copy of their paper, then the whole process stops. So then the book talks about how there's a difference. I mean, you can have processes within functional systems. And the difference between a functional system is that the accounting department has software just for accounting. And then the warehouse has an inventory program. It's a separate piece of software. And the inventory program has nothing to do with all the accounting stuff, accounts payable, accounts receivable, and all the other things they keep track of. So they had separate pieces of software. Is anyone familiar with, I don't know, I guess they call it this anymore, Delta and Pineland? Big research company about halfway to Greenville. Well, maybe 10 years ago, and they were a very successful, large, profitable business in the Delta. They were purchased by Monsanto about 10 years ago. Monsanto was a huge, huge international company. Well, I know about this because the woman who used to teach programming here at Delta State, she was a genius programmer. They hired her. They took her away from us. They doubled her salary to bring her over there. And what she did, it took her 2 years. She had to make their software, their systems, work with the new Monsanto systems. And there was a lot of problems because they were different operating systems, different database. It was just all kinds of problems. And the reason I heard about this is because her husband taught here, and he would tell some of the horror stories, how hard it was. And she finally did it, but it took her like close to 2 years. That's because they had functional systems, and Monsanto had a enterprise system. So you just don't throw away your systems. You have to adapt your old systems to, and what's happening more, so much in this world is that the big companies are buying out the small companies, and the small companies just become part of this large corporation. And information people really are challenged to make things work. All right, so here's the book's diagram about the problem with paper-based systems. See, there's the sales guy receives the order, but then he has to send the paperwork, and however long it takes for the paperwork to get over there, the mail boy has to, run that over there. This is before computers at all. And so every time something happens in a different functional area, and then the paperwork has to be sent to another area, there are these delays. And if someone is slow on their part, it really delays things. So you have increased lead times, and then you also have increased cycle times. The whole process, the whole big process, takes a lot longer. And these time-wasting things add up. You have, this is kind of like, I guess, a play on the just-in-time. You have what the warehouse guys would do, because they didn't want to be short on some supply, they would have more stuff, more components than they really needed. So more money had to be invested in the just in case someone needs it. I'm going to have 10 of these items instead of just 3 of these items. Another big process is that one functional area really didn't know what was going on in another functional area. So there's this lack of visibility. You don't even really know necessarily where the process is. If it stalled, where did it stall? So there was a lot of time wasted just trying to figure out where these delays were. So delays are no longer acceptable because these companies are so big that, think about it, if there's delays in a small company, the delays would be, impact even more in a large company because there's more processes and there's more functional areas, because one function is in Chicago, the other function is in Tokyo. If you don't have enterprise systems, things really can slow down. So reliance on technology. Now here's a diagram where you see each of these functional areas has their own database. So they have their sales information system. This has the warehouse information system, the accounting information system. So this did help some, but there's still some delays because whatever is in here has to be translated here. And as I said, I create a sales order, send it to the warehouse. The warehouse guy has to refill in the same information. Even though it comes over a computer, he still has to fill things in. And what we want is these things to be automatically filled in. Now, some of you are probably saying, well, isn't this how it happens? And it is how it happens in good, sophisticated, modern software. But it didn't happen this way 20 years ago. This has been developed, and they're perfecting the software more and more. Didn't I tell you this stuff was going to be boring? Was I right? This reminds me. This is the first time I'm doing. This is like an accounting course to me, which I decided not to be an accounting. Do we have any accounting majors in here? No. I decided I would rather watch paint dry than be an accountant. But here I am, kind of doing accounting. Well, this is not exactly accounting, but This is the kind of thing you do in accounting classes. So here's the enterprise system. We have one big database, and everyone has their data in there. So if I'm in the warehouse and I fill out some information, this goes to, well, then the person in purchasing will open up their screen. They have a different screen, and there might be a thing to click on like current orders. And they'll bring up the orders, you click on one, and the information is already filled out, like how much they want of each thing and by when. All the information that the guy in the warehouse filled out doesn't have to be input again. So just for that, it's tremendously more efficient. Some people might say, this sounds like CIS major stuff. But we're arguing, or we're thinking in the College of Business, that this is good for no matter what your major is. And again, why we're doing this is because we feel that a certain number of you will end up working for large corporations, because there's more, the corporations are becoming larger and larger, and your job opportunities are going to be somewhat limited to working for a big company. So if you have this kind of understanding of this process-based understanding of what goes on, you're much more hireable. You look a lot better than the person who doesn't have this. So that's kind of why we're focusing on it, giving you some kind of knowledge worker type skills.